Sophie Laurent stood by the window of her art gallery in Paris, sipping a glass of red wine as she watched the busy streets below. The clink of glasses and quiet murmur of conversations in the background made her feel like a spectator in her own life. At 32, she had achieved everything she'd once dreamt of. Her gallery, La Vie en Couleur, had become a renowned place for contemporary art, attracting critics and buyers from across Europe. But success had a hollow ring to it when she thought about the other part of her life, her marriage. 6 years had passed since she married Markus Hartmann, a German architect with sharp features and a mind always buzzing with ideas. She could remember their wedding day as if it were yesterday. How handsome he looked in his tailored suit, the way his smile had lit up her world. Back then, they had everything, a passionate romance that transcended the physical and delved into their shared dreams of traveling the world, creating art, and leaving a mark. Yet, as time passed, things began to change. Markus had thrown himself into his career. His architectural firm in Berlin had taken off, and though they lived apart, Sophie had hoped their love would remain strong. The distance, however, had done more than just create physical space between them. Their conversations had dwindled from intimate late-night calls to routine check-ins, dominated by discussions of work and logistics. Sophie hadn't seen Markus in nearly 2 months. His last trip to Paris had been brief, and even then he seemed distracted, more interested in his projects than in her. The gallery, which had once been a source of pride for both of them, now felt like a lonely fortress Sophie had to manage on her own. That night, as she stared out of the window, she couldn't help but wonder if she was becoming invisible to her husband. He had once been captivated by her beauty, by her love for art, and by the way she lived life with so much passion. Now he barely seemed to notice her at all. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening behind her. She turned to see her assistant, Elodie, standing there with a polite smile. "Madame Laurent, the guests are arriving for the exhibition. Shall I show them in?" Elodie asked in her soft French accent. "Yes, of course," Sophie said, placing her wine glass on the table. "Thank you, Elodie." As the guests began to filter into the gallery, Sophie put on her professional mask, greeting each one with a warm smile. She moved through the crowd, discussing the latest pieces on display, but her mind kept drifting back to Markus. What was he doing right now? Was he thinking of her at all? It was during one of these drifting moments that she noticed a man standing by one of the paintings, his gaze fixed on the canvas, as if he were lost in thought. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features, dressed in a tailored suit that gave him an air of sophistication. There was something about the way he looked at the painting that intrigued Sophie. She walked over to him, her curiosity piqued. "Do you like it?" she asked, her voice smooth and professional. The man turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a spark of recognition. "Very much," he said in a low melodic voice. "The use of color is captivating. It feels alive, as if the artist captured a moment of raw emotion." Sophie smiled. "That's exactly what I love about it too. The artist, Isabelle Moreau, has a way of making you feel something with every brush stroke." "I'm Luca Moretti," the man said, extending his hand. "Art critic and enthusiast." Sophie shook his hand, her smile widening. "Sophie Laurent, I own the gallery." "Ah, so you're the one responsible for bringing such remarkable works to Paris. I must say, I'm impressed," Luca said, his eyes lingering on hers for a moment longer than necessary. Sophie felt a flutter in her chest. It wasn't often that someone made her feel seen, truly seen. And Luca was doing just that. They continued to talk, their conversation flowing effortlessly from art to travel to their shared love of culture. Luca was charming, witty, and attentive in a way that Markus hadn't been in years. He listened to her, asked questions, and seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. As the night wore on, Sophie found herself laughing more than she had in months. She was captivated by Luca's stories of his travels through Italy, his passion for art, and the way he saw the world. He had a certain vibrancy about him that was infectious, and for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt alive. When the exhibition finally ended, and the guests began to leave, Luca lingered. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Sophie," he said, his voice soft and sincere. "I hope we can continue our conversation another time." Sophie hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with thoughts of Marcus. But the allure of Luca's attention was too strong to resist. "I'd like that," she said, her heart pounding in her chest. As Luca left the gallery, Sophie stood by the door, watching him disappear into the night. There was a part of her that knew this was dangerous, that this was the beginning of something she couldn't control. But another part of her, the part that had been starved of affection and passion for so long, was desperate for more. Days turned into weeks, and Sophie found herself thinking about Luca more often than she should. Their casual meetings at art exhibitions and gallery events had become a regular occurrence, and each time they met, the connection between them grew stronger. Luca had a way of making Sophie feel like the most important person in the room. He listened to her in a way that Marcus never did, and he had a passion for life that reignited something within her. She found herself drawn to him, not just because of his charm, but because he made her feel alive in a way that she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't long before their meetings turned into something more. One evening, after a particularly successful exhibition, Luca invited Sophie to join him for dinner at a quiet, candle-lit restaurant on the banks of the Seine. The atmosphere was romantic, and the conversation flowed as easily as the wine. As the night wore on, Sophie found herself opening up to Luca in ways she hadn't with anyone before. She told him about her marriage, about how distant Marcus had become, and about the loneliness she felt in her life. Luca listened, his gaze never leaving hers, and for the first time in years, Sophie felt truly understood. "I don't know how it happened," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But somewhere along the way, Marcus and I lost each other. I don't even know if we can find our way back." Luca reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You deserve to be happy, Sophie. You deserve to be with someone who sees you, who appreciates you for who you are." Sophie felt a lump form in her throat. "But what if it's too late? What if we've drifted too far apart?" Luca's grip on her hand tightened. "It's never too late to find happiness, Sophie. Sometimes you have to make a choice to live for yourself." Sophie's heart raced as she looked into Luca's eyes. There was a part of her that knew this was wrong, that she was on the verge of crossing a line she couldn't come back from. But the temptation was too strong, and the pull of Luca's attention was too powerful to resist. Later that night, as they walked along the Seine, Luca leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, tentative kiss at first, but as Sophie responded, it deepened into something more passionate. In that moment, all of her doubts and fears melted away, replaced by the thrill of being desired again. But as they parted, and Sophie stood alone on the banks of the river, the weight of what had just happened began to sink in. She had crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed. Let's continue the story, diving deeper into the emotional and psychological ramifications of Sophie's choices, while maintaining the complexity and tension within the plot. Here's the next part of the story. Scene 3. The Web of Lies. The next morning, Sophie woke up with a knot in her stomach. She sat at the edge of her bed, the memory of Luca's kiss still lingering on her lips. Her heart was heavy, weighed down by guilt and confusion. The line she had crossed felt too far gone now, and yet there was an undeniable pull toward Luca, a man who made her feel alive in ways Marcus hadn't in years. She glanced at her phone, hoping for a message from Marcus, but it was empty. Nothing. His silence, once something she could handle, now felt unbearable. It was as if the distance between them had grown wider overnight. Sophie rose from her bed, walking to the window that overlooked the Parisian streets below. The city was vibrant, alive with its usual energy, but Sophie felt hollow inside. She had made a choice, one that now seemed impossible to undo. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Luca. "Good morning, Sophie. I can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again?" Sophie's heart fluttered, but the guilt was still there, gnawing at her. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. Every part of her screamed that this was wrong, but the allure of Luca's attention was too strong to resist. "Soon," she typed back, before setting the phone down and turning to her closet. She needed to clear her mind, to get back to her work at the gallery, where at least she could distract herself from the chaos of her emotions. At the gallery, the usual flow of clients and art enthusiasts didn't bring Sophie the comfort it once had. Elodie, her assistant, noticed her unusual distraction. "Madame Laurent," Elodie said gently, approaching her, "is everything all right? You seem off today." Sophie forced a smile. "I'm fine, Elodie, just a little tea." Her heart pounding. "I'm fine, Elodie, just a little tired. It's been a long few weeks." Elodie nodded, but there was concern in her eyes. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Sophie thanked her and returned to her work, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't shake the memory of Marcus. She had been married to him for 6 years, and yet here she was, exchanging secret messages with another man. It felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life. Later that day, as she stood in the gallery, examining a new shipment of paintings, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Luca. "Dinner tonight. I'll be thinking of you until then." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the moment where she had to make a decision. To either stop this before it went too far, or to dive in head first. Consequences be damned. Her finger hovered over the screen, her mind racing. She thought about Marcus, about the life they had built together, the promises they had made. But then she thought about Luca, the way he made her feel, the way he looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world. She typed her response before she could stop herself. Yes. That evening, Sophie found herself standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress. She had chosen a simple, elegant black dress that hugged her figure, but as she looked at herself, she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Was she really doing this? Was she really about to meet Luca again? The thought of Marcus weighed heavily on her mind, but she pushed it aside. This was about her, about what she needed, what she wanted. And right now, she needed to feel alive again. She arrived at the restaurant, her heart pounding in her chest. Luca was already there, waiting for her at a candlelit table near the window. He stood when he saw her, his smile warm and inviting. "Sophie," he said softly, his eyes lighting up as she approached. "You look stunning." Sophie smiled, feeling a rush of warmth at his compliment. "Thank you." They sat down, and as the evening wore on, the conversation flowed effortlessly, just as it had before. Luca was attentive, hanging on her every word, making her feel like the center of the universe. The wine flowed, and with each sip, Sophie felt her inhibitions slipping away. By the time dessert arrived, Sophie found herself leaning closer to Luca, her heart racing with anticipation. She knew where this was headed, and yet she couldn't stop herself. She didn't want to stop herself. After dinner, they walked along the Seine, the lights of Paris reflecting off the water, casting a romantic glow over the city. Luca took her hand, and Sophie felt a shiver run down her spine. This was wrong, she knew that, but it felt so right in the moment. They stopped at a secluded spot along the riverbank, and Luca turned to her, his gaze intense. "I can't stop thinking about you, Sophie," he whispered, his voice low and husky. "I haven't felt this way in a long time." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She knew she should walk away, but the pull of his words, the intensity of his gaze, was too much. And then he kissed her. It was a soft kiss at first, tentative and unsure, but as Sophie responded, it deepened into something more passionate, more urgent. In that moment, all of her guilt, all of her doubts, melted away. There was only Luca, and the way he made her feel. They parted, breathless, and Sophie stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. "I should go," she whispered, her voice shaky. Luca nodded, but there was a look of longing in his eyes. "I understand, but I don't want this to end, Sophie. I don't want us to end." Sophie bit her lip, torn between what she knew was right and what she wanted. "I don't know if I can do this, Luca." He took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "You deserve to be happy, Sophie. And I want to be the one to make you happy." Sophie stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. Scene 4. The Price of Betrayal. Days turned into weeks, and Sophie found herself living a double life. By day, she was the successful gallery owner, the loving wife of Marcus Hartmann. But by night, she was Luca Moretti's lover. Their affair was intoxicating, thrilling, and dangerous all at once. Every stolen kiss, every secret meeting, was a reminder of the life Sophie had chosen, one filled with passion, but also with lies. Marcus remained oblivious, consumed by his work. He called occasionally, but their conversations were brief, filled with polite exchanges and talk of his latest projects. Sophie could hear the distance in his voice, but instead of confronting it, she buried herself deeper into her affair with Luca. Luca, for his part, was everything Marcus wasn't. He was attentive, passionate, and fully present in their relationship. With him, Sophie felt alive, desired, and important. But as their affair continued, the guilt began to gnaw at her, growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with Marcus over the phone, Sophie found herself sitting alone in her apartment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. What had she become? A liar, a cheater. The very thought made her stomach turn. But it wasn't just the guilt that weighed on her. It was the realization that she had fallen out of love with Marcus long before Luca had come into her life. Their marriage had been crumbling for years, held together by memories of a love that no longer existed. And now, it was all falling apart. The weight of Sophie's secret had become unbearable. Every day was a battle between her guilt and her longing for Luca. But even the excitement of their affair had started to sour. What was once thrilling now felt suffocating, like a web of lies tightening around her. One afternoon, as Sophie sat in her gallery office, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. A rare surprise. He almost never called during the day anymore. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the screen, before finally answering. "Hey," she said softly. "Sophie." Marcus's voice was sharp and tense, unlike the usual cold distance she had grown accustomed to. "I'm in Paris. Can we talk?" Her heart skipped a beat. Marcus hadn't visited Paris in months, and now, out of the blue, he was here. "Of course," Sophie replied, trying to sound casual. "When?" "Tonight, our apartment. I'll be there by 8. Sophie hung up, her mind racing. Marcus didn't just show up unexpectedly, especially not with this urgency in his voice. Something was wrong, and she could feel it deep in her bones. The afternoon passed in a blur, the usual gallery visitors and tasks feeling insignificant compared to the dread looming over her. By the time 8 o'clock rolled around, Sophie was pacing the apartment, her nerves frayed. She had cleaned the place obsessively, as if scrubbing away the evidence of her betrayal would somehow erase the guilt that plagued her. But nothing could prepare her for the moment when Marcus walked through the door. He looked exhausted, his tall frame slumped with the weight of something unspoken. His sharp blue eyes, once so full of warmth, were now clouded with something darker. Sophie opened her mouth to greet him, but the words stuck in her throat. Marcus didn't waste any time. "Sophie, I know." Her stomach dropped. She could barely breathe. "No, what?" Marcus let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "About Luca. About your affair." Sophie felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the nearest chair, her head spinning. She began. But the words wouldn't come. What could she say? There was no defense, no excuse. How long has this been going on? Marcus's voice was eerily calm, but there was an edge to it, a simmering anger that frightened her. Sophie's mind raced. She could lie, try to downplay the situation, but it was too late for that. Marcus knew. He had known for who knows how long. 2 months, Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. It's been 2 months. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as if trying to steady himself. When he opened them again, his gaze was piercing. Why, Sophie? Why would you do this? Tears welled in Sophie's eyes, blurring her vision. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. The confrontation she had known was inevitable. But now that it was here, she didn't know how to explain the storm of emotions swirling inside her. I don't know, she choked out. I was lonely, Marcus. You were never here. It felt like you stopped caring about me, about us. She wiped at her eyes, her voice breaking. I just wanted to feel something again. Marcus let out a harsh sigh, running a hand over his face. So this is my fault? You're blaming me for your affair? No, Sophie exclaimed, shaking her head. I'm not blaming you. I know I made a terrible mistake. But Marcus, we haven't been happy for a long time. You know that. Marcus's expression hardened. We could have worked on it, Sophie. We could have talked, gone to counseling. Anything but this. His voice cracked, and for the first time Sophie saw the pain behind his anger. You didn't even give me a chance. Sophie sobbed quietly, her guilt overwhelming. He was right. She hadn't given him a chance. She had taken the easy way out, falling into Luca's arms instead of facing the cracks in her marriage. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I loved you, Sophie. I still do. But I don't think I can forgive this. Sophie felt her heart shatter. She had known this was coming, but hearing the words still cut deeper than she could have imagined. I understand, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'll move out. I'll leave Paris if you want. Marcus shook his head. You don't have to leave Paris. But this is the end of us. The finality in his words crushed her, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse under the weight of it all. But deep down, she knew he was right. Their marriage had been crumbling long before Luca entered the picture. The affair had just been the breaking point. Marcus stood up, his expression resolute. I'll stay at a hotel tonight. We can talk about the details later. He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, but just before leaving, he turned to look at her one last time. Goodbye, Sophie. And with that, he was gone. Sophie sat there, numb, staring at the door. The silence of the apartment was deafening, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of her actions. She had destroyed her marriage, not just with her affair, but with her refusal to face the problems they had been avoiding for years. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Luca. Thinking of you, can't wait to see you again. Sophie stared at the screen for a long time before deleting the message. Luca was no longer part of her world. He had been an escape, a distraction from the reality of her failing marriage. But now there was nothing left to distract her from. She sat in the dark, the weight of her choices crashing down on her like a wave. The secrets, the lies, the affair, they had all destroyed the one thing she had once held dear. Months passed, and Sophie began to rebuild her life. The divorce was painful, but it also gave her a sense of closure. She and Marcus had both agreed that their marriage had been over long before the affair. They were simply two people who had grown apart, clinging to a relationship that had already unraveled. Sophie continued running her gallery, pouring herself into her work as a way to heal. She had ended things with Luca shortly after the confrontation with Marcus. It hadn't been easy, but she knew it was the right decision. Luca had been a temporary escape, a bandage over a deeper wound. But now, Sophie was ready to face her life without distractions. She spent more time with friends, reconnected with her family, and slowly began to rediscover who she was outside of her failed marriage. It wasn't easy. There were days when the guilt and loneliness overwhelmed her, but there were also moments of clarity, moments when she realized that her mistakes didn't define her. One evening, as Sophie walked along the Seine, she stopped at the same spot where she had kissed Luca months before. The memory of that night no longer held the same allure. Instead, it served as a reminder of the choices she had made and the consequences she had faced. She took a deep breath, letting the cool breeze wash over her. She was learning to forgive herself, learning to move on. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. Thank you for watching this story of love, loss, and redemption. We hope it resonated with you. If you have any questions about Sophie's journey or your own thoughts about relationships and forgiveness, we'd love to hear them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more engaging stories like this one.